So you may remember at the beginning of the week, we covered what was optically one of the worst decisions. Probably the Northern Research Group, again, that's another one of those groupings of Tories that's in the Conservative Party, did. Because as we've seen, the National Conservative Conference, was obviously the Democratic Organization of Conservatives, they've had a conference. Well, now they've had their own conference. The Northern, again, Conservative group went and had their conference in Doncaster, and for some reason they decided to drop George Osborne into there. Again, optically not very good, because like many people in the North, blame specifically George Osborne for all his austerity measures for, well, the current situation of the North. Then, for some ungodly reason, because you want to bring him along for reasons, you decide to bring Ben Houchen, the guy who is currently the only Metro regional mayor for the Tories, who has bet his entire re-election on getting the Freeport built there, and he's having currently scandal after scandal after scandal breaking about what is going on at that Freeport. And eventually, if Freeport ever does actually open, it will not be a good legacy for Houchen, because we have seen what Freeports do. They are not good economically for the region. It will just act as a magnet as lots of businesses just move in to that Freeport zone and area. Again, won't create new jobs, will just move jobs into that area for all the wrong reasons. And of course, there's all the crime aspect. There's a ton of stuff already going on. Like I say, if you've been reading the Private Eye, Yorkshire Post, or Yorkshire Evening Post, you know all about the goings on up there. So why on earth you would bring him to say, yes, this is a perfect example of like a Northern Conservative when he is steeped in scandal at the moment. Yeah, optically, this conference did not do very well. And surprisingly, it seems we're going to read here that Conservative Home, who, again, as we have said, big influencer in the non-Conservative parliamentary party, did not really seem to have a very high opinion of this conference, or even the Northern Research Group, expressly saying, well, the high chance is that they're all going to lose their seats, and that this entire movement, this Northern Conservative Research Group, isn't going to exist after the next election. So why should we listen to them? Ladies and gentlemen, the current Conservative Party, not even caring for its new coalition that it built. This does not bode well for Rishi Sunak. I will tell you now. When even Conservative Home is going, yeah, don't pay attention to them, then I think at this point we can pretty much write the red wall off for the Tories. But before we go diving into this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page, the one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. And of course, there's the YouTube thank you button and the Pony Club down below as well. And of course, remember today we'll be going over Nadine Dorris's little sob piece that she wrote in the Daily Mail, which will be fun. So, as always, thank you very much. And of course, if you do just click the like and share button, and like I say, leave a comment down below. Thank you very much. So, on with today's story. So, this comes from Conservative Home with the title of The Northern Research Group Conference. How can we deliver everything and nothing? So, for all that one of Boris Johnson's big selling points is supposedly the unique connection with the Red Wall, he had a very unfortunate history with the Northern Research Group. Last year, the then embattled Prime Minister made all the wrong headlines when he stood up at their inaugural conference in Doncaster in favour of another visit to Ukraine. This is a country with a plausible claim to being his real political heartland, but which does not then return MPs to Westminster. This year, there seemed to be no question of his attending. But by announcing his resignation on the Friday evening, he had all but completely eclipsed all the weekend media cycle. And to undermine one conference may be unfortunate, but to undermine two looks very much like carelessness. But your correspondent did not catch the 5:55 from King's Cross for nothing. For all the Westminster drama, the Northern Research Group conference provided at least as much of an insight into the divisions of the divisions currently racking the Conservative Party. George Osborne, for example, as we said before, why you would bring George Osborne as your big name to this conference when you're again trying to attract all those people who voted Tory for you for the first time. George Osborne's a big name, maybe for your true blue Conservative, but bringing George Osborne into that area where you might have people who went, well, I voted for the Conservatives first the very first time last time, so I'm going to go to this conference to see what they offer, and oh, there's George Osborne. Yeah, not a good look, not very good optics, guys. But back to it. So George Osborne, for example, took a very tacit swipe at Johnson's Red Wall bona fides by trying to contrast the Northern Powerhouse, a geographically specific idea with very clear underlying thesis, with levelling up, which could apply to anywhere and mean anything. Well, here's the thing. Just like the Northern Powerhouse, you didn't do it. You didn't do it at all. Like I say, Leeds got a new entrance and exit to the railway station, but other than that, that was it. And then Jake Berry also took a very Juden's view of the government's headline pitch to the North. At one point, even asking the panel, how can we deliver everything and nothing? Again, Jake Berry, someone who is definitely very, very worried. So, not that the two men were, of course, otherwise on the same page, of course. The Tories cannot blame the blob and the civil servants and the establishment for their failures, said Osborne. It's time to blow up the blobonomics, thundered Sir Jake. The former Chancellor was received with polite quiescence in the hall. Rishi Sunak also put in an appearance straight off the plane from Washington. The screen behind him bore the same 5 promises as usual during his speech, and he did not claim to be a Prime Minister for the North, albeit in the context of gently reminding, reciting the cause for Minister of the North, one of the many demands bubbling around the conference. Again, actually having a Minister for the North would actually be very, very helpful into helping to decide a strategy and how that would going around. But of course, the Tories have been very, very reluctant to do so, because even though they had such big wins in 2019, we still call it the Red Wall for a reason. And trying to assign a minister for the North, well, he's going to immediately butt heads, first of all, with all the Labour regional metro mayors we've got up here, all the councils up here, predominantly Labour controlled. He would not have had a very good time. So at least it was smart for Rishi Sunak not to, so we say, acquiesced and admit that for a minister for the North. But back to it. So it was enough to try and get a standing ovation, and even rather a very rapturous response from Sir Jake in his closing speech. Elsewhere, Deborah Davison, the levelling up minister, seemed to be testing the elasticity of a collective response when she told the hall that she wanted the party to be much more bolder on housing. Sure, there was a slightly stream of consciousness flavour to it, certainly in the digital community hubs. And yes, she had the courage on planning that seems to correlate with MPs who have announced that they are standing down at the next election. But perhaps the most telling bit was her summary of her conception of the devolution and decentralizing agenda. Give more cash and get out of the way. This attitude was widespread throughout the conference, with endless calls for more powers and more mayoralties. Much less often mentioned was the tension between those two propositions. First of all, fiscal devolution. The ability to set local tax rates and keep the receipts. There's plenty of merit in principle, and from a conservative perspective, the devolved bodies which do nothing but distribute central government money and endlessly demand more to give to voters is to give voters no reason not to vote Labour after all. Yet, all the regions represented by the Northern Research Group currently run a substantial fiscal transfer deficits. That's lots of money levied from London, the southeast, and the east of England is redistributed to the north via government spending. Whilst there ought to always be a role for the British government to try and make strategic investment in things like infrastructure for day-to-day spending, have a more arm's length relationship with the Tories, with the Treasury would of course cut both ways. After all, there is neither the sense nor justice in supposedly allowing an area to stand on its own fiscal feet if it cannot fail to. Are voters really prepared to accept that, or to tolerate the emergence of postcode lotteries as management of taxation and public services get diverged? So, again, the Tories would never go for that, because ultimately what would happen, as we've seen, where you've had some very successful regional mayoralships, and yet the Tories' offering has been very, very lackluster. Like I say, even Houchen, who was there at the conference, again, staked his entire re-election on getting that free port up and running, and yet constantly there is more and more and more stuff just about what is going on there and about the dodgy dealings that have gone on there. So Labour, who have been playing this card a lot longer, are aware of the problem. As I noted in a recent column, Gordon Brown's proposal to take huge areas of redistributive spending out of the day-to-day democratic control altogether and try and devolve sweeping new powers whilst having judges protect how the flow of cash from the south to those bits of the country with progressive values. Perhaps some alternative mechanism was floated at one of the breakout panels, but I missed it. But without one, the enthusiasm for fiscal powers and Devo Max on display in Doncaster could have been a complete put-up job by Southern taxpayers. And again, that's always the Tory reason why they don't want to do it, because if we did, it would always be the South that would have to sort of pay to level up the North. Well, here's the thing. Because we have had essentially the Tories entirely focus on the South being sort of the most successful area, and very much to the detriment of the North, which has ended up with nothing, the South should have to pay for it because they have succeeded where the North has not. And if you get the North working, then guess what? You don't have to pay that anymore. Otherwise, it just creates more and more problems for social spending, for health, investment, all kinds of stuff. I mean, you look at the big spending calculus of what the Tories would have had to spend, level up 10 years ago if David Cameron had done it, versus now if Rishi Sunak to do it. Yes, there's some inflation, of course, going on, but leveling up 10 years ago would have been far cheaper under David Cameron than if Rishi Sunak would have had to do it, because they could have spent a lot less money and got away with it, because these problems become systemic, they come almost built in. And when you start spending money and you've left sort of this area to essentially rot on the vine, which essentially the Tories have done with the North, you have to spend more money into it. The longer you leave it, the more money it have to spend. That's the truth. And I know there's a lot of people who are going to be living in the South saying, well, why do I have to sort of spend that? But If you don't get the North running, eventually you are already in effect spending more of your tax money on the problems in the North, you know. But there you go. So, um, he continues. I would submit a good intellectual test of any Devo Max or Federalist proposal is the university question, or who sort of would this work if we let the South do it? So outside the main hall, the most interesting debate was a frank panel discussion about about the difficulty of designing devolution settlements that fit the economic, social, and political geography of the North. Ben Houchen, who despite an appearance from Rishi Sunak was a substantive terms the conference's true star, stressed that such agreements have only worked when people feel an adequate sense of connection with the rest of a devolved area. That he could make a major investment in a hub railway station, for example, because voters in the rest of the Tees Valley felt the benefits. Where this wasn't true, and he signaled out the new Northeast Mayoralty as an example, the devolution risked devolving, no pun intended, to an exercise for tit-for-tat check warring, where they got at least 3 million, so we should get 3 million too. No model for conductive to try and strategic growth-focused investment. Well, if the Tees Valley is getting 3 million, and bear in mind it's a Tory mayoralship, then that would clearly be pork barrel politics of they are giving the money, extra money to Houchen because they want to see him succeed. Whereas you've got this new Northeast mayoralship, they're not really that interested. And if you know the whole story behind the Northeast mayoralship, it was something that certainly Cameron did not want to do. Boris did not want to do. You know, all these Tory prime ministers that we've had do not want to do it. But it has happened. And we are going to get one. And ultimately, once again, this is going to be yet another Labour-run mayoralship, which again is not going to be happy. The fact that Houchen getting all this money, and yet they're not getting anything. And we have seen that time and time again, because they do not want to see these Labour mayoralships succeed. Of course, there was also the very thorny question about whether there are sufficient people of good caliber in local government to make it effective. Oh, yeah, that's really good. Those people in the northern, those northern civil servants, they're absolutely awful. That is basically what he's making the argument here. That's very telling. But there you go. And of course, how to structure even a devolution deal to avoid a dominant party simply outvoting or even ignoring other areas lumped in with their heartlands, especially when the local authorities who think they lose out can be simply stonewall a deal. Well, here's the thing. Maybe then we shouldn't be voting on things like first past the post. Henry Hill doesn't even realize it there. I doubt he does, but that there is an amazing argument for, once again, why we should not be using first past the post to elect, not only just MPs, but these regional mayors as well. And of course, remember, the Tories, we used to have switch voting. So you could vote for your favourite, and then you could vote for your second favourite. The Tories have changed that, so that is no longer an option. Because they want first past the post, because it favours them. But he doesn't even realise it. He's made a very good constructive argument for PR for these people. But there you go. This might also have been added another, that if devolution proceeds in a patchwork fashion, that the economically strongest areas, and of course the biggest cities, start holding on to more of their own money, does it not risk leaving those areas left behind even more dependent on fiscal transfers than now? Well, again, this is why you've got to make sure that the money is evenly distributed to all these areas, these left behind areas. And, cities should be concerned with all the areas that are around them, not just the city itself, because most people who might live or even work in the city will be coming from outside the commuter belts, as sort of we call them. Um, my own town, of course, is a classic example of this. Most people who live in Barnsley don't work here. They either work in Leeds or they work in Sheffield or they work surrounding here. So these cities should actually care about the towns, villages that happen, because it's part of their thing. They should care about infrastructure. And I know devolution is again a big thing. It would be a good thing because again, people in that area get a say. And all this article has been very, very much poo-pooing the idea that people in the area shouldn't get a say because, well, they can't be trusted, essentially. That's the feeling I'm getting. I don't know about you, but that's the feeling I'm getting from this article. So back to it. So Houchin was obviously not a Devo skeptic by any means, but the difficult practical questions he proposed contrasted somewhat with the unrelenting enthusiasm to moving further and faster on display elsewhere at the conference. To some extent, it was all a little academic. The government is very unlikely to deliver much more in a way of significant constitutional changes before the next election. After which, it is a very open question. And again, this is where it gets interesting. Part of which is a very open question of how many of these Northern Research Group MPs will actually remain in Parliament. Perhaps it is only after the 2019 tidal wave has retreated, well, saying a very good prospects for his own party there, Henry Hill, reviving the shape and extent for any more enduring Tory breakthroughs in the North. And of course, that have had a more clear-eyed debate about how to try and sustain it, distinct from the understandable reflex to try and just put some blue water between it and the government before it can really take place. Yeah. And then, of course, you can see some of the comments. In fact, the first one, yeah, this one, the fact that we even have a Northern Research Group at all, like the north of your own country, is somehow just as foreign as the EU and China. Says a lot about the general disconnect of the Conservative Party and how they have allowed their supplies once in a lifetime majority to be squandered by the cult of Boris. Oh, yeah, not a lot of, to say, very happy people. But devolution is, I think, is always still and always will be, of course, a big topic for concern. I'm very pro devolution. I think that local councils should be given a lot more money to choose, how they spend their money, and in a way, sometimes if you do talk to people who work at sort of the city regional level, they will say quite clearly sometimes it feels like we're just an extra layer of government. So while I am sort of for devolution in these in these areas, I would want to see the benefits. What are the benefits going to be? And if they can spend the money and it can be spent in a good way, whether again they sort of take in their own tax and they get to spend it first. Maybe, of course, all the tax comes in and maybe the government goes, well, tell you what, here's 30% of what the tax receipts for that area are. I don't know. I think there's a ton of stuff out there, people by written who are like really pro devolution, who will say, actually, this is how we can make devolution a really big success. Of course, my big contention about this is rather than having the different regional, as you said, Yorkshire mayors, I've always been very, very much with the one Yorkshire plan. I think that would work out far, far better than having individual regional mayors. We could have our own sort of, again, regional parliament sitting. You can have that elected by sort of PR. And again, the people of Yorkshire would have had a lot stronger voice rather than regional mayors. Not that I'm upset, of course, we've got regional mayors. It's good that we have them. Like I say, we do see a lot of good coming from these regional mayors. Again, over in Manchester, perfect example of a good regional mayor, how a regional mayor can have a very good effect on the city and on the region. And then you've got Ben Houchen, someone who is, again, betting his entire re-election campaign on that free port. And like I say, all the stuff that's coming out about that free port, not necessarily, should we say, well. So optically, probably not a good idea to have him at the conference. Same for George Osborne as well. And of course, George Osborne, he wasn't mentioned in this article, but of course, George Osborne trying to fish the idea of a Northern Powerhouse 2.0. Well, you never delivered on the first Northern Powerhouse. In fact, once again, you abandoned the whole idea completely. And I have said it, always give credit where credit is due. If Cameron and Osborne had fully committed to a Northern Powerhouse, to the whole idea, to giving that money, well, I don't think we would have had the result that we would have had in 2016. Because, like I say, the EU, big fan of the Northern Powerhouse. They were going to help fund that as well. People forget that. There's a ton of stuff that actually could have done and being good. And one of the many anti-talking points that many Tories would try to advance, why are we spending all this money on an area that's not going to vote for us? And it just goes to show you the mindset in the Tory party. Why should we spend all this money on an area that's not going to vote for us? If they had done the Northern Powerhouse and actually done it and delivered on it, maybe you would have had people who would have said, well, actually, the Tories have done this Northern Powerhouse. Maybe we'll vote for them. Shock, horror. You do something in politics that makes people want to vote for you. It's such a revelation that they've been having in the Tory party of recent years. But yeah, devolution. Like I say, overall, you can tell that Conservative Home, or at least Henry Hill, probably was not, shall we say, that too thrilled about the Northern Powerhouse. And like I say, the ending sums it up perfectly. He says, why do we have to listen to these guys when when it's very likely next year they're not going to exist? So why should we have to listen to them now? So I think that tells you everything about how Conservative Home feels about the Northern Research Group. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, please remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.